I was watching the, I know this isn't going to shock anybody, but I was this is months ago. I picked up the Blu-ray set of the 1978 Battlestar Galactica. Of course, my favorite version, or my favorite rendition of the Galactica, I dare say the real Battlestar Galactica, that has all of its roots intact from its creator, Glenn Larson, the late, great Glenn Larson. And yes, he was great. We're talking about the guy that gave us Buck Rogers, Knight Rider, you go down the fucking list. Nightman, hell yeah, I love Nightman, which that's available on DVD, by the way. Anyway, I was watching Battlestar Galactica, and I was just going through the Blu-ray set, because Amazon had some kind of sale months ago where you could buy the entire series for like $15. And you think I wouldn't get that? You're crazy. Of course I did. Jumped on that in a heartbeat. And it's only the widescreen set. There's two sets for this. There's one where it's like this definitive edition, and it has the what used to be called the pan and scan version. Now they'd call it, I guess, 4:3. Or now, I mean, that's what they called it then too, but now most people would recognize it as 4:3. And then the other one is like this widescreen edition that they created for it, which, the original 3-hour pilot saga of a Star World for Battlestar Galactica. Don't worry, we got tech questions. We got all kinds of fun questions to get into in a second. Welcome to your Wednesday Q&A, the Golden Stallion. Woo, the podcast champion's here with you. Okay, don't worry, I'm just getting this out. They had they cut it down to a little over 2 hours, 125 minutes, and they released it in theaters around the world. In fact, this might shock some people. So in France, in fact, I was just recently in France, and I could see the fruits of this, shall we say. You got to understand, in France, like in America, of course, this is kind of changing because of how things have been, what Disney has done with the franchises late. In America, maybe Star Wars is kind of waning, but for a long time, like, Star Wars was considered the epitome of, space-based entertainment, shall we say, in America and throughout much of the world, and rightfully so. In other parts, particularly in France, first you got to understand two things about in France. One is that France is the country of origin of Valerian, which Valerian, maybe you saw the movie that came out, was that last year, Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets or whatever. Brilliant film. I really enjoyed the hell out of it. I did a review of it on a Sovereign Tech Prime episode, I believe, if I remember correctly. But that's based off of a comic that came out way before Star Wars. And in fact, if you do a little DuckDuckGo search about it, you're going to find just how much George Lucas copied from Valerian. Because a lot of people, when the movie Valerian came out, they said, well, George Lucas just copied, or, Valerian, Luc Besson, who did it, he copied Star Wars. And it's like, no, motherfucker, it's the other way around. So anyway, France has Valerian. Now, a couple things. So that theatrical version, or the theatrical release of the pilot of Battlestar Galactica, which was very, very popular, of all ironies. In fact, it was really popular kind of after ABC already said, hey, we're going to cancel the show, because the original Battlestar Galactica only went like one season. Of course, then there were riots outside of with ABC. Sorry, was outside of ABC Studio. I think I said ABC Studios, and they ended up doing Galactica 1980, which really only had one good episode, which was Return of Starbuck, which is the last episode of it. Anyway, so in France, this show, when the movie hit in France in 1979, it came out around the same time that Star Wars finally hit in France. Okay. So now the French, ironically, so a lot of people would claim, in fact, George Lucas or, Fox, whatever, would end up suing ABC over what they thought was, various infringements, copyright infringements, IP infringements of a sort on Battlestar Galactica in comparison to Star Wars. And in fact, there's different ways that Battlestar Galactica had to start doing effects for the blasters, because they thought it was like too, they were getting worried that it was going to be too much like the blasters in Star Wars and so on. And so that, this is a whole big to-do. Ironically, in France, all of this is the exact opposite, right? All of this is the opposite, because the French see Star Wars, A New Hope, the 1977 movie. They see that, and they think, hey, wait a minute, you're copying Valerian. What the fuck? Can we get a Valerian movie here, please? Because Valerian is just this cultural phenomenon that happens in France, okay, with the comic books. But then Battlestar Galactica hits, and they see that, And they love Battlestar Galactica. They think it's way better than Star Wars. I mean, by leaps and fucking bounds, this is a much bigger deal there. And it still is. Like, there is a huge... France may be like the hub of, real Battlestar Galactica. Again, the one from 78, not the new horse shit. Real Battlestar Galactica. It's like a hub of that kind of fandom. And I could still see it when I went to Paris recently. I mean, it's still such a big fucking deal there. And because, unlike Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica didn't, or part of the reason is that, well, first off, it got to go toe-to-toe with Star Wars. Second off is that it didn't copy Valerian, as to where, the French felt that, Star Wars is just copying Valerian. So, it has a very strong fan base there. I wouldn't dare say now at this stage in the game necessarily that it's still bigger than Star Wars there, but it is huge there. Like it's like Jesus in Italy and Coca-Cola in America. I mean, it is a big fucking deal. And I don't know if that gives me any proclivity to the French or wanting to learn their language and maybe one day watch Galactica with some of them in their native tongue. But yeah, I always thought that it was really cool. Anyway, my point in telling you all this was not about that. And I know we're 6 minutes and I need to start talking about questions here. But I put in the Blu-ray the other night and last night. And I noticed, I was like, oh, yeah, let's see what's for the extras. And I never looked at the extras on this thing, and I can't believe it. There's some odd fucking 35 minutes of deleted scenes just from Saga of a Star World on there, the first one, and then there's deleted scenes from Lost Planet of the Gods. And there was also a commentary with Herb Jefferson Jr., who played Boomer, okay, who I've met, tremendous guy. Dirk Benedict, who played Starbuck, who, personal hero, okay, growing up. And then Richard Hatch, the genuinely late great, absolutely late great Richard Hatch, who played Apollo, and who also in the newer Battlestar Galactica who played Tom Zarek. About the only good thing that ever came out of that show. So, and Richard Hatch, of course, you may have heard on Patreon, I did a dedication to Richard Hatch because Richard Hatch was a friend of mine. And it was both bittersweet, funny, and powerful to listen to this not director's commentary, but it's in the place of director's commentary, to listen to this commentary on this Blu-ray of the pilot episode of Battlestar Galactica. And they talk the whole time, and man, are they having so much fun, and it is so cool, and you learn and hear things I never knew. And it's pretty amazing. There's a lot I could really break down about that. In fact, there's a lot of really interesting things that I think the average person that would listen to what they're saying wouldn't pick up on the importance of it, including where Richard Hatch asks the question. It's like, hey, did they ever say that there weren't any lizard Cylons? There's a reason that he asked that question. I'm not going to get into that. But regardless, this was just so brilliant. I really miss, we were talking about on the Sovereign Tech Prime episode this week, episode 295, I think it was. We were talking about how, getting control of your data. This lack of special features and of the commentaries and everything, I am willing pretty much to buy Blu-rays or 4Ks, whatever, just for the reason of I want to continue to see that kind of content get put in because it is so powerful. It gives you a whole new light on anything that you're watching, and it could be something from 40 years ago. It's really, really powerful. In fact, one of my favorites is the director's commentary with John Milius and Arnold Schwarzenegger for Conan the Barbarian it was originally in the DVD release, but I think if you get the Blu-ray, that's the complete quest. It has the commentary in that. It's the funniest goddamn thing you'll ever listen to because John Milius and Schwarzenegger must be drunk, and it is absolutely a way to experience that film. And if we're just gonna go back to the days of where we let whatever the network, and in this case it would be more Hulu and Netflix and so on, where the network gets to control how you view something, and there isn't this market demand for a lot of extra content and so on, and actually bringing value to the table when you tell us to constantly rewatch something. I mean, that's a shame to lose that because it's remarkable art, that we're talking about here. And really, I think Battlestar Galactica is. There's a real magic to Battlestar Galactica the original one, not the newer one. Fuck it. It didn't have nearly as much fun with, shall we say, mythology and the history of Earth itself and so on as the original Battlestar Galactica did, which is what I think gave it a lot of its visceralness and its instant appeal, where people, anybody that was kind of watching it all around the world, and I think there's a reason it was so powerful around the world, like they kind of saw their symbols and they saw, like they recognized some very primal aspects in it. It's really amazing stuff. Doesn't hurt that Rick Springfield's in it either. But anyway, I've been talking about that for a little bit, but I thought that was an interesting subject to get into. Okay, why don't we get into our main tech question, I guess, this week. And this is pretty good. I like this because it actually dovetails very nicely off of what I was just talking about. And let me read the question here. My 20-year-old DVD player. Fuck yeah, man. All right, real quick. It says my 20-year-old DVD player / stereo finally died. Okay, I'm going to stop here for a second. I remember my first DVD player that I bought specifically to. So here's a funny story about DVD players. So you have the movie Gladiator, okay, which came out, what was that, 98, 99? 99, I think. And you have Gladiator, which is technically my favorite film ever. Okay. I love that movie. It came out on DVD. It did not come out on VHS for another 6 months. Now, I knew that this was going down, okay, because at the time, back in the 90s, you had specialty movie stores, okay, where that's all they did was sell you movies, VHS, DVDs later on, and whatever, or laser discs before then even. And the one for me was in my local mall called Saturday Matinee, and I loved this place, and I would just walk around it forever, and I'd look at all the packaging, read the packaging, and I'd learn so much. It was really, and just like sometimes I'd walk around in there with a notepad because I was a teenager. I'd walk around there with a notepad and I'd just like start writing it out. Okay, I'm going to get this one. I'm going to get this one. I'm going to get this one, blah, blah. And eventually they even added in CDs, which was really nice because then I could also buy the soundtrack at the same time that I bought, say, the VHS. And they were the only place in town. There's a Walmart around, there's some other places, but Saturday Matinee was the only place in town that would sell widescreen VHSs. Okay. And they, at the time, widescreen was kind of a new thing, and it would say like widescreen in big letters going down the cover of the VHS. Of course, when DVDs came around, all of it was widescreen, or at least whatever was meant to be widescreen. And that was always annoying because as much as I'd go in there, it's like they didn't recognize how often I'd go in there. I don't know if I annoyed the fuck out of them because I'd be in there so much and the guy just wanted to hang out. But because he'd ask me every time, he's like, do you know you're getting the widescreen version? I'm like, yes, I know I can fucking read, But I guess that just speaks to how kind of, well, I don't want to say how dumb. No, I will say it. How dumb people were at the time. But anyway, so I would, when Gladiator, I found out, okay, no, it's not going to come out on VHS for a while. I'm like, well, I can't wait that long to watch this goddamn film. I got to see it again, fuck. And my girlfriend at the time, it was also her favorite movie. Like, we just fell in love with this film. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess I got to buy a DVD player. So I go to the local electronics store and I buy this $300 Sharp. And that's the company, the electronics company, Sharp. I buy this $300 Sharp DVD player. Sharp mattered. Sharp is still a huge company. People just don't know what they're buying. But anyway, at the time, Sharp was still a brand that you kind of rock with. And this thing was massive. I mean, it was huge. Like, picture a 15-inch laptop multiplied by 4 or 5. I mean, it was a massive, massive device. And it had, like, all the gold-plated RCA jacks and the digital out and all this shit, and S-video and everything. I mean, like, this was a tricked-out DVD player. But at the time, I mean, that was a good price for a DVD player. The idea of, like, $100 players and all that, even a $100 VCR, was still unheard of. In fact, the same day, I ended up buying another VCR that it was a Philips that had, like, 18-micron heads. Normally you have a 4-head VCR, right? Well, I got the one with all the micron heads and everything, and that cost me $180. So anyway, I bought this DVD player, and man, the thing, it looked like a tank, and it was a tank. And as far as I know, that DVD player, I don't have it now, but my family does. I think my brother, one of my brothers has it right now, and he's still using it. to this day. I mean, it's that fucking good the thing is an absolute tank. So the idea of having a 20-year-old DVD player, 98, that's about right, 2018, that's what we're in. Fuck yes, they can last that long and keep on going. So anyway, I weep. I say all this to weep for your DVD player because, God damn it, they do not make them like they used to. And I mean, I kind of wish I still had that Sharp DVD player. I mean, that thing was, oh damn, was that a beauty? Anyway, okay, so reading on with your question. So yours has died. As far as I know, mine's still alive, but that doesn't matter. It's kind of moot. It seems most today, all right, my 20-year-old DVD player / stereo finally died. It seems most today have a separate player and maybe rely on a soundbar since flat screen tiny speakers suck. I don't need high end, but do need volume with my hearing loss. So get a Blu-ray player and soundbar, or are there simpler options? Surround effects aren't necessary. Okay, so here's the thing, is that you're absolutely right. Most TVs today, the flat screens and all that, their speakers really do suck. And it's the nature of the beast. Like, you can't have a thin display and have mind-altering sound coming out of that. All right, and you're absolutely right about that, and you know that. So, but this is a great question. I like this. In fact, recently when I got back on the Blu-ray kick, I did recommend a Blu-ray player. In fact, it's the same one that I use, and I'm going to recommend it to you, and it's going to be linked to in the show notes if you want to check it out. So anyway, but before I get into that, I want to talk about the sound thing. Now, there are some companies, like there's TCL, who they sell flat screens, but they're not like ultra flat screens. And they put a couple of nice 2-inch speakers at the bottom of their televisions. They're a few inches thick, these TVs, but you could still hang them on a wall if you want to. I don't think they're ugly at all, and I love the one that we have, that Stephanie and I have here. And they're cheap. Like, a flat screen, I want to say it's... Maybe is it a 40-inch or 32-inch, something like it's in that range, but it's under $200. It was like 140. It was a real steal. And I think we might have even bought refurbished, and that's fine. And it has Roku in it and all that. I mean, it's very nice. But the thing that amazed me is I thought I was going to have to get a sound bar too. But no, the speakers on this thing are fucking dynamite. I mean, like they're powerfully loud. And they're good sized speakers. I took a look, obviously. Look. One of my oldest nicknames is the voider of warranties. That is I. Okay, I am ready with anything that I get to void that warranty in a heartbeat. All right, no time whatsoever. So anyway, I've had a good look at these speakers, and they're great. I mean, these are like speakers with this TCL television. These are speakers that you'd get, back in televisions back in the day. I mean, it's not like I remember I had a big 60-inch Philips television, and this was like a rear projection LCD. Okay, so it was really thick. We're talking the thing that like stood out by a foot, and it was literally a good 5 feet tall. This is a huge television, and underneath that rear projection screen, you could put a massive sound system. You could put a 10-inch woofer. You could put, all this different stuff, or 3 of them, hell. And I mean, you're not getting that kind of sound, but for a smaller room, the sound that comes out of these TCL televisions is tremendous. I mean, it's a really good, crisp sound. So I don't actually use a sound bar for the TV there. But the Blu-ray player I'm about to mention, I do. But if you're looking to get into a new TV, I definitely recommend some of those TCLs. And the Roku features, I mean, it's actually pretty nice. As long as it stays limited, I don't mind it. I don't want something tracking every little thing I do. Which speaks to the Blu-ray player that I'll mention first, then we'll talk about the soundbar. The Blu-ray player, I think there's a 2018 model now, but I'll share with you the 2017 model just because I know how rock solid it is, how adaptable it is, and how feature rich it is. And it's an LG, and it's the 2017 LG 4K Ultra HD 3D Blu-ray player. And that's, there's like a specific model number, but like I said, you can look it up. I have it linked in the show notes. This player does it all. It's like $120, and it's worth every penny because you can do the 4Ks if you ever get into that in the future. It does not have like Roku built in, which I think that's why some people knock stars off of it. That's fine. Because you can always add a Roku cheaply enough to for $30. you can get the best Roku player for $30 and add it to any television. You cannot get the best Blu-ray player guaranteed for $160, right? So it's much easier to add a Roku than it is to find a great Blu-ray player. And this is a great Blu-ray player. So it'll do that. So it'll play your 4Ks, it'll play your Blu-rays, it upconverts your DVDs to 4K, okay, which is a little bit of an ugly process, but it can do it, and it makes it a little easier to watch. And also, it'll work with a TV that's not 4K. My television's 720p, actually, so, that's fine. It can also play, if you burn discs that have, like, MP4 files or AVI files and all that, like, remember DivX players used to be a really big deal. It can do all of those. But even better, you don't even have to burn the discs. It can do it, but you don't have to do that. It has a USB port on the front, and you can put whatever, and I've put MKVs. You think of the file extension that I've put on it, and I put it on a flash drive, I plug in the flash drive, and I can watch whatever just right off of the flash drive with this Blu-ray player. It is such a priceless piece of kit. I love it. And for $120, you can't go wrong. And actually on Amazon, it's listed as Amazon's choice. I've had it for about a year now. It is wonderful. It does everything except for the Roku part. But like I said, eventually, like something like a Roku, they keep upgrading those, or like a Fire TV, they keep upgrading those. And so, when it's a $30 little device, you buy a new one every couple of years. As to where, like you said, you've had your DVD player for 20 years. Why the hell, and I don't blame you for wanting to expect your new Blu-ray player purchase to last you at least another 5, 10, maybe, I don't know about 20, because like I said, they don't make things like they used to. But, it should last you a good long while, as to where a Roku is just a hunk of plastic. Who gives a shit? So I think it not having those connected features is great. I really think that's a feature, not a bug here, okay? So yeah, this is the Blu-ray player that I absolutely recommend, and it's pretty slim and small. Like, it sits, my TCL TV doesn't sit but a couple inches up, and it sits under that perfectly. Of course, granted, you're going to want to be putting a sound bar there if you're going to get into a sound bar. Now, my recommendation for a sound bar, that is also linked to in the show notes. My recommendation as far as a sound bar goes, ironically, because it's pretty good, like it's shockingly good, is from Amazon themselves. They have their little electronics line called Amazon Basics. Actually, it's not just an electronics line, it's also a clothing line and so on. For $100, you get one. Actually, for half that, you can get one without the subwoofer. But for $100, you get one with kind of the built-in subwoofer and so on. This is a beautiful, beautiful little. It does 2.1. Again, you're not worried about surround sound, so 2.1 is great. This is very, very. It's Amazon Basics. This is a very basic sound bar, but it has fantastic sound that comes out of it. And it's probably about the cheapest you're going to find. That's part of like the purpose of Amazon Basics, is to give you something that has pretty good build quality, even if it's using lower end materials, but it has good build quality, and and it delivers on what it's supposed to be, and can play with the big boys. That's kind of the purpose of the entire Amazon Basics line. So I recommend this one. And especially for the price, and because I think when you get into a lot of the other claimed features with soundbars, where they're talking about doing virtual 3D surround and all this other crazy shit, none of that ever lives up to the hype. It never does. Just get something that does, again, if you can get stereo with a subwoofer, perfect. I really think that's perfect, because the only way, in my opinion, the only way that like Dolby Atmos or 8.1 or 7.1 or 5.1, take your pick of the sound technology that you're talking about, DTS, whatever, okay, the only way that those really deliver on what they're promising, and I mean this, is if you're going to spend, in the 4-digit range. Like, that's the only way that shit really delivers, ever. And believe me, I've bought 5.1 systems, and I've tested them out that were, in the $200 to $300 range, which they claim to be so fantastic. And I've even tested them in smaller rooms, and you don't notice. You're not hearing the fucking TIE fighter fly around you. It's not happening. So better to just get like a really good stereo, sound transmission, and a subwoofer is great too. Better to have that than to fuck around with trying to find a low end thing that does any kind of surround. But yeah, I know you already said in your question you're not interested in any kind of surround sound. So So this will do you, famously. So for a couple of $100, give or take, you're ending up with a, tremendous Blu-ray player and a really good soundbar. And if there's ever some kind of wild sound technology that comes out in the future, then you're only out $100 for the Amazon soundbar. So that's the route that I would go. There isn't really anything simpler. Any of those kind of combined, those sort of all-in-one ideas have kind of fallen by the wayside, and I have never really encountered one that I thought did a great job in the first place. So better off getting a Blu-ray player that is so adaptable, and then just that nice, simple Amazon Basics soundbar that gives you, the great stereo and a pretty solid subwoofer. So anyway, those are linked to in the show notes. Great question. I love that. I love talking about that sort of thing. I really don't get those kind of questions enough into Sovereign Tech anymore. And for some understandable reasons, because now a lot of this stuff, you're in whatever ecosystem you happen to be in. For example, you're in Apple's ecosystem, so you're just going to use Apple TV that connects to whatever, or you're into the Google ecosystem and maybe you're just going to connect Chromecast or something. I mean, people have fallen into their ecosystems and have their very set brands and whatever else that they decide to run with, which is one of the things I love about a great Blu-ray player and about Blu-rays in general is that, it's a Sony technology at the end of the day, but it's very much like it's pretty agnostic in that, you don't have to buy into a specific ecosystem to enjoy everything that Blu-ray has to offer. And Blu-rays still have far more to offer than anything that Netflix or Apple TV or YouTube or whoever is fucking doing. I mean, there's just way, way more to offer. There's a reason that a lot of prominent YouTubers are releasing Blu-rays of their content because they know that there's a demand for this, and it's a way of protecting their content from egregiousness from tech giants. Their YouTube channel gets shut down or whatever else happens. I mean, it's a big deal. So anyway, great question on that. Let's get on to, before I get into another question, let me talk a little bit more tech, just something that'll be coming up in future Sovereign Techs that I want to mention to you. So Firefox Reality was released. Firefox Reality is from the ground up, it's a VR web browser. It's a VR version of Firefox, and it is using the Quantum engine, not Gecko or anything. Because Paige Peterson, Pixel, she was years ago. When she was out in California, she went to a VR event. And Firefox was showing off what they were doing, as far as having web. This is even before web VR was a standard for the browser. And she thought it was pretty fucking impressive. And I have no reason to doubt her, on anything. And it was, anyway, so Firefox has finally released their VR version of their web browser. So this has been years in the making. And fortunately, they released it for the Oculus Go, or for the Oculus ecosystem in general. I did install it on my Oculus Go. I am going to be testing it out and reporting back to you this week, this coming Sovereign Tech Prime episode, which I guess will be episode 296. So I can't wait to do that. That's going to be, I'm intrigued to check it out. But yeah, that's out there now. It also works on Daydream and Vive, but it only works on the standalone headsets as far as I know, which is probably why it works on the Oculus Go, because it's standalone. But yeah, it only works on, they're saying right now it only works on standalone headsets. So that's something to look forward to. But a couple other things that got announced actually this morning, ironically, and I am recording this is being done on release day, September 19th. And this is really interesting. So I wake up this morning and the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, depending what part of the world you're in, Mini, which is their kind of Sega's answer to the NES Classic, or the NES Classic, sorry, the NES Classic and the SNES and the Super Nintendo Classic, or the NES Mini and SNES Mini. Which is supposed to have so many games. They announced it earlier this year. They have pushed it back to 2019 for a release. Which I think is fine and dandy. I think that's great. Now, there's probably a couple reasons behind this. Okay, one of them is that they also announced yesterday that there is going to be they're going to release the kind of Sega Classics lineup that they released for PS4 and Xbox One. They're going to release that for the Nintendo Switch for the holiday season. So obviously, I don't think that they want that to compete with sales of the Genesis Mini, right? So there's that part of it. But then also, they were working with a company called At Games, which At Games has released actually retro consoles over the years with Sega in partnership, an official partnership with Sega. And they have been lackluster releases, bad emulation, shitty sound, shitty, controllers, joypads, whatever. I mean, it's not been pretty. So for them to hold off to 2019, I think that's fine. However, interestingly, this morning, at the same time that Sega announces that, Sony comes out and says that the PlayStation 1 Mini with 20 games is going to be out December 3rd. You better believe I'm going to jump on that. That is an exciting fucking development, like all the way. So I can't wait for that to come out. I did actually. So Amazon just put up pre-orders for the Commodore 64 Mini, which I pre-ordered, and I also pre-ordered the Neo Geo Mini. Both of those are available now. They're on the higher end of prices as far as these mini retro consoles go. But I told you before, I said I'm going to get I plan on getting pretty much every one of these that get released. I'm not going to jump on the Atari VCS because that's not really a retro console. I'll probably jump on the Intellivision when that comes out. I'll get the Sega one when it comes out. And Nintendo really, I thought they were going to announce another one this year. But maybe they're going to wait until next year and take on the Genesis Mini. I don't know. But that was a little interesting development that I thought. I mean, I'm glad these things exist because they are just so easy. They're really plug and play. You put them in. There's no internet connection. You just pop them in. You grab your controller. Bammo, away you go. And it's so. That just makes things so easy. Like when you're done with dinner, hey, you want to rock out some Dr. Mario? Okay, yeah, and you just do it, and it's so much fun. Okay, let's get into a couple other questions here, and we're kind of out of the tech segment of it. Let's see, scrolling down here to my questions. Oh, by the way, I'm so glad that so many of you loved the conspiracy talk last week. And I will, during the Wednesday Q&A, like I said, I'll revisit that question periodically if there's time for it to talk about some of my other favorite conspiracy theories. But I'm glad that everybody really enjoyed that one. So let's see. No, we already did that one. Oh, okay. Here, Q&A question. Somehow my Brian and I got into a discussion about fantasy/sci-fi languages like Elvish and Klingon and how they're created. So this is someone else. Of course, I'm Brian Sovereign, and this is another person's boyfriend, Brian, I guess. And let's see. We did some quick research into how Klingon was developed. It was interesting, but I'd love to hear your take on it. You often know some interesting insider information that wouldn't be on a Wikipedia page. Finally, what is your favorite constructed language from sci-fi/fantasy and why? Awesome question. I love this question. This is a lot of fun. So, okay, I don't know if I have any seriously insider information outside of what would be on a Wikipedia page as far as the creation of Klingon. Of course, Klingon, the actual language, a lot of people don't know this, and I'm sure it says it on Wikipedia. A lot of people don't realize this. It was started, it was fully realized by Mark Okrand, who, after Star Trek 3, ended up releasing the Star Trek Dictionary, which is just one of my favorite books ever. But it was actually started by James Doohan, the guy that played Scotty, the late, great James Doohan. I'm really annoyed at how many dead people we're talking about in this episode. These people should not be gone. But anyway, so yeah, James Doohan actually kind of started the whole thing, and he more or less had to start it with, I think, for the animated series, and certainly, I think he started for the motion picture, for Star Trek the Motion Picture, and Mark Leonard kind of ran with it, which another late, great Mark Leonard. Who would go, who best known as playing Sarek and so on, and was really a rare actor in Star Trek for having played all the major races, Vulcan, Klingon, and Romulan. Of course, he played the Romulan commander in Balance of Terror in the original series. And a lot of people don't realize that Mark Leonard is kind of the main Klingon that you see in the beginning of Star Trek the Motion Picture. So Mark Leonard just kind of picked up on it, went with what James Doohan had, and this is part of the talent that people don't realize James Doohan had. James Doohan, speaking of the animated series, this is what made me think of the animated series, which Star Trek the Animated Series is fucking amazing, and does not get, it got credit in its day, it won Emmys, but a lot of people don't. A lot of Star Trek fans have never seen it, and that's partly due to it didn't really have a home video release, and Gene Roddenberry was kind of against the series in general, which I don't think makes any fucking sense because it's brilliant. But anyway, a lot of the aliens in that, a lot of the alien characters and from all different species were pretty much voiced by James Doohan. And because he was known, I mean, that's why I got hired for Scotty, because he was known for his ability to do accents, to do regional characters, and he did it so well. And I certainly wouldn't disagree with that. Scotty is, I mean, got to be the most famous Scottish character in genre entertainment ever. I mean, even more famous than any of the Highlanders, any of the McLeods, right? So I'd like, I don't know, maybe people want to get into. No, we're not going to talk about Outlander or whatever the fuck that show is. I don't care. Okay. Anyway, so Scotty, yeah, big deal. So James Doohan kind of started this whole thing, but then when Star Trek 3 comes around, actually with Star Trek 2, like this idea of developing the Star Trek languages more becomes a thing. Like Vulcan, okay, you hear Vulcan being spoken in Star Trek 2, and it's a beautiful language, and I wish it were more fully realized within Star Trek itself. Maybe Star Trek Discovery will do that. I would be fully supportive of it. Because if you were to ask me, like, what are some of my favorite constructed languages from sci-fi and fantasy, if there was more Vulcan, it would probably be Vulcan. I'm not going to say that that's my definitive answer. I'll give you more later when I get to that part of the question. Okay, but Vulcan is so, like, it's written, like the iconography of it is poetic. Like, it looks like musical notes, which I think is really beautiful for a species that's like so logical, right? Because it just shows their passionate heritage, which I think is really, really powerful. So it has that, and then when you actually hear it being spoken in Star Trek 2, which is one of the rare occasions that it is, it sounds poetic. It sounds just like the iconography of how it's written. And it's so beautiful. That really sounds like such a powerful, beautiful language. So that started becoming a thing with Star Trek when they realized, hey, we kind of got something here. And everybody was taken so seriously. And that was the thing going on with Star Trek in general, where it was being taken so seriously. You look at like the Starfleet manual from '77, right, where like this guy, not Frank Joseph, I can't know, because that's the Ancient Alien guy. Anyway, sadly I can't remember the guy's name, but he made this whole book with all these different schematics and diagrams and all these ship listings. I mean, with hundreds of ships and all this stuff. He made this huge book that's still sold to this day because it's just so much fun and it was all based on the original series, and it was the Starfleet technical manual, and it's amazing. But that's how passionate people were. They wanted to make Star Trek more fully realized. They picked up the ball and ran with it. Nick Meyer certainly was a huge part of that with Star Trek 2. And so when you get to Star Trek 3 and Leonard Nimoy jumps in, I think Leonard Nimoy enjoyed, the whole Vulcan language thing so much that he said, hey, why don't we, let's go full bore with this Klingon thing. Let's do this. And that's when you finally get really the Klingon language becomes like a more constructed thing and not just something that gets belted out like it did in Star Trek the Motion Picture. And then you get, Mark Okrand, releases the Star Trek dictionary, the Klingon dictionary. And then from then on, everything starts getting translated. And, once Star Trek The Next Generation hits, that's when it really goes through the roof, right? Because you end up with, like, they started selling tapes, which I had the tapes. I still have MP3s of them as well. You have conversational Klingon, power Klingon, where literally you would listen to, these language cassette tapes were popular, audio cassette, were a very popular thing back in the day, where you would listen to, listen to these to learn the language. Obviously, that's still done today, just a different technology. And there was another one, the Klingon Way, I think was another one, and these would teach you Klingon, and I got pretty good at it myself. And it was a fun thing to speak at conventions. In fact, what was kind of ironic is I felt like certainly the way that you spell it out phonetically with Klingon, if you phonetically spell out like Japanese, they're very, very similar. I don't know if there's any intentionality behind that, but like there would be points where I would be talking to someone in Japan and we would both be like typing out Klingon, This is back in late 90s IRC days, okay? And there's times where like I'd get confused because then they'd start typing out in Japanese and it wouldn't be like kanji or anything. It'd be phonetically kind of spelled out or transliterated, I should say. And I'd be like, what? Wait, okay, oh right, okay, now we're in Japanese. So this was something. I mean, they were really. They're really running wild with this, and especially when they started releasing. I mean, to do the book is one thing, but then to start releasing the audio cassette tapes and all that, this is getting pretty serious. And I get very much annoyed, okay, with as far as with Klingon specifically. This is speaking of a symptom here, okay. I get annoyed with Rick Berman, who was the big daddy of Star Trek after Gene Roddenberry died, okay, where he came out. And I think it was around the time that they were going to start making Enterprise. He started coming out in interviews and saying, look, we're not trying to show you how life in the 24th century should be. Stop taking this so seriously, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it wasn't like when Shatner came out and said, told people to get out of their parents' basements and get a life, all these Star Trek fans. It wasn't like that. It seemed a little worse. And it was a little worse because I know where William Shatner's coming from. Rick Berman has no right to be insulting the very thing that he's in charge of. And he really was, I think he was very much insulting it. Because he's, you can't tell me because Rick Berman was responding to a lot of fans who were saying, hey, could you explain the economics of this a little bit better? Could you explain how the philosophy here works and all that? Because this episode seems to contradict this episode. And, he's kind of coming out, and I sort of get what he's saying, but he's coming out and saying, like, look, we're not trying to tell you how things should be. We're not trying to, create like this pattern of life for the 24th century. But you can't go fucking selling audio cassette tapes of an entire fictional constructed fucking language and then tell me you're not trying to create an inner consistency within a universe. And you're completely missing the point of why people are so fanatical about what you're putting out there, because they see a world where they could be accepted. That's why so many people got into Star Trek back then, because, there's a future where it's all right to be different. Right? IDIC, remember Gene Roddenberry's idea? IDIC, yeah, it was a marketing thing back in the 60s, but it became something I think he genuinely believed in. IDIC was a Vulcan philosophy of infinite diversity and infinite combinations, IDIC. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's what got people on board with this, and that we'd get peaceful and we'd get past all this bullshit, all the petty bullshit and whatever else. And, I don't want to get into the money thing, whatever, but I'm just saying, okay, that was so insulting of Rick Berman to do. And I mean, he pretty much took a dump on like every Star Trek fan that ever bought the Klingon dictionary or bought any of those audio cassette tapes and so on. I mean, he really did. Like that was really fucking ugly. I'm glad he's gone. I'm actually, just to get rid of Rick Berman alone, which he started falling away anyway, and my old friend Brandon Braga ended up taking over quite a bit towards the end of Enterprise, more so. Actually, it was Manny Cotto ended up getting really involved at that point. But regardless, if Star Trek had to stop for a few years just to get Rick Berman fucking out of there, good. Okay, because that guy, I mean, that pissed me off so much when he said that. He clearly did not understand what the hell he was dealing with, and what the fans were about and so on. So anyway, yeah, I don't, again, other than that, I don't really have anything, I don't know, necessarily intriguing to add on to that, other than, there was a lot of talk of getting pretty experimental with Star Trek, where they wanted to do full on, like a show that had all to do with Klingons, and they were going to be speaking kind of Klingon throughout a lot of it. And there wouldn't be switching much to English and so on. I mean, this was very seriously talked about by Braga and some others, that was going to end up being a thing. At the time, Marvel took over the comic book series, and Marvel was putting out issues of the comic, alternative issues of certain comics, where it was entirely in Klingon. You'd end up with, you have the Bible getting translated into Klingon, which is a very weird thing. I've read it, but as weird as it is, it reads almost like Robert Young's literal translation from the 19th century, which I think is a good thing, for it to be like a simpler language and for it to not have so much confusion. But boy, I mean, that was some yeoman's work doing that. And then, then there's been, Hamlet's been put into Klingon, and so on. I mean, it was for a good long while, it was a really big deal. And I do want to say that I get what they're doing with the Klingons. I know they're going to change it up in season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, but thinking about it, especially with the Klingon language and so on, I think that they did a very hurtful thing by pretty much turning the Klingons into a bunch of racists. Because you sort of, it's another, now that I think about that, you're kind of shitting on people that like care about Klingon in the first place, because then that can just get attributed to like some kind of MAGA-esque bullshit. And I think that's shitty. You can have the Klingons be enemies, but you didn't have to turn them into, something that was just so, well, again, I mean, like that was clearly meant to be some kind of allegory towards, President Trump and so on and his followers. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, maybe they felt like that was wrong. Maybe they did get some feedback, and that's why they went sort of full bore with the Mirror Universe storyline instead. I don't know, but anyway, that's all speculation. Stuff I should be talking about in the Star Trek update, which will be coming out soon. Again, really, I should, I don't really have anything to add on as far as like with the language of Klingon. Like, I think that's terribly unique. Most of the interesting stuff I think is really out there, and I kind of covered the high notes here anyway. But like Gene Roddenberry wasn't really involved with that at all. It wasn't something that he was looking to have, made up or anything like that. Now, as far as my favorite fictional constructed language from, let's say, science fiction and fantasy, let's get into that. So real quick, though, too, both Klingon and Elvish, or what do they call it? Not Hylian. That's maybe it's Hylian. Both of those you can actually learn on Duolingo. Ironically, like in the app now. I know Klingon was originally just a beta on the website, but now it's actually in the app, which I think is pretty interesting. So, like Hylians or the Elvish is cool. I know there's a bunch of different dialects to that and everything. Klingon is certainly, maybe one of the most fully developed fictional languages out there. Neither are really my favorite. Like I said, if Vulcan was more developed, I'd be on board with that. But actually my favorite language, and I don't know that I guess maybe in some ways it's still canon, but my favorite fictional language is a fairly recent one in the grand scheme of things, considering that, Elvish was made a century ago or more or less, and, Klingon's been around for decades. And that is actually Mandalorian. And I think they used it at points in Clone Wars, so I'm guessing it's still kind of canon. But there was the book called Hard Target? So a woman, Karen Travis, which I think she's a great author. I love her books. She wrote for Republic Commando. There was a video game for Star Wars, called Republic Commando, which was all about, and it was actually an awesome first-person shooter. Very short, but brilliantly done. Great story, really, really technical. I really enjoyed the hell out of it. That has to do with these, clone troopers that are, special forces, and takes place around episode 2. And in fact, it's better than episode 2. So, Karen Travis wrote like a trilogy of books for this game, to kind of help sell this game, I guess. And they all had to deal, or like there was a lot of aspects to it that dealt with, kind of the Mandalorian origins, shall we say, or what, even though this gets into the history of the Mandalorians within Star Wars. Boy, you want to talk about a species getting rewritten. You think the Klingons have been rewritten. The Mandalorians have been rewritten over and over again, and certainly characters like Boba Fett and Jango Fett and so on. Like, are they even Mandalorian? What are they? And they're not. And it's a fucking mess. It really annoys the hell out of me, because I liked what the old Star Wars expanded universe, before Disney bought it and reset the canon, I liked what they were doing with the Mandalorians. I thought that was really cool. I liked what was being done with the Mandalorians in the Clone Wars. Of course, that's still canon. But regardless of that, Karen Travis created an entire language for the Mandalorians. And I love this language. And I actually spent a shit ton of time like really trying to integrate it and learn it. And what I thought was beautiful about it, I'll explain what I like about it. What I thought was great was that the Mandalorians, so like in the old EU were like this kind of, felt very like tribal hunters, almost like predators, right? Like the Predator, like, as in the movie, the, Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And of course there's the new one, which I'll do a review of soon. That might be in this week's Sovereign Tech Prime episode, actually, that I'll review the Predator, the new movie. They're almost like that. And so Karen Travis specifically designed Mandalorian, the language, to be what would be called a hunter language. Okay, meaning that it's kind of basic in a hunter-gatherer sense. Okay, so it feels like it's got some antiquity on it, but also it's basic in that a lot of what you're trying to express has to have context, and as in situational context, and also there's some body language expression sort of involved. Like you'd have to be able to read the person's body language. Now, what I think is beautiful about that, first off, is it creates a simple language. Okay. The other thing I like about it is how many people are going to know what the fuck Mandalorian is, right? and are going to care. And I think you can actually still go to her website and you can download like PDFs, because she put it in the back of the books, but I think you can download the PDFs, which actually have a fuller realization of this language. But so there's not so many words, so it's kind of easy to learn. I mean, and I've learned other languages before, like real languages, Farsi and so on, that I had to do for, well, anyway. So this hunter language, like I really like that aspect of it, that it was so simple, and I liked the basic expressiveness of it, and I liked that, and I thought about this with the language itself, I like that it requires situational context, okay? So there's less confusion because you have to use your fucking senses and be paying attention to what's going on and not accepting just someone else's word for it, okay, which I think lends to a lot of real world problems in our lives, okay? This is a point that like General Semantics brings up and why they invented E prime, which that's not a sci-fi language, but I think it's a beautiful one. Okay. English prime, E prime, big fan. So, I mean, there's that aspect of it that you have to see what's going on, but then also because there is a lot of potential meanings to different words that you use within a hunter language, like it speaks more to what I was just saying, that you have to really pay attention to everything that's going on. You have to pay attention to body language. You have to pay attention to the context of the situation that you're in and so on. And I think there's a real advantage to that, because you can say that, well, if I have a more precise language as compared to a hunter language, that I can get my point across. I don't necessarily think so, though, because a more precise language can actually lend itself to more confusion, because things get taken as statement of fact when perhaps what's being expressed is highly subjective. And a hunter language, okay, because of its basicness, lends itself to the subjectivity of what may be going on. And I think that there's a real power in that. But also I thought it was a beautiful language. I really liked Mandalorian. That's probably my favorite. I hope it's still kind of canon. If anything, if I found out that Mandalorian isn't considered canon and Disney says fuck it, like I'll just rip that shit and I'll use it in the Sovereign Universe or something, because I think it's so cool, and I'll just rebrand it. I really like that language, and I'd love to be able to talk to other people in it. A big fan of learning multiple languages. I think it's a very helpful thing, be they fictional or otherwise. I've been learning French for a while, and yeah, I think that's a great thing really to engage in. Okay, so there was a question about anime so anyway, let's move on from that. But I really do like that language. I do think something that science fiction doesn't get, well, let me finish off this point. Something that science fiction and fantasy doesn't get into enough is the use of clicks and body language and a lot of other things that real Earth languages will implement. But could allow for a greater like alien feeling of, when you're traveling to stars, say in science fiction or something, where a species could seem truly alien if they had, if they had some, you added in things more than just the verbal, aspects, just the words that come out. I think that's a lost opportunity to explore that sort of stuff, and I think it could actually be, really a lot of fun. I guess as an honorable mention, if you want to hear another language that I think is really great, I think Minbari from Babylon 5 is another absolutely beautiful fucking language. I mean, it almost sounds almost Hebrew in what it puts out there. like the term for the future is silza. Like, I mean, a lot of this stuff feels very, it doesn't have a like Hebrew would, but it feels like a slightly more beautiful Hebrew. And I really, really appreciate Minbari. That's another gorgeous language. Never been actually Straczynski might have fully realized that, and he just never released it because he has that fear of being Elrond and so on. But that's another one out there that I think is really, really, really stunning stuff. So, okay, let's get on to, I was going to do the anime question. I think I'll save that for next week. Someone asked about my favorite anime. I want to get into that. I will tell you, one that I'm going to mention, okay, that if you haven't seen it, you need to check this out, is Darling in the Franxx. Okay. Awesome, badass, beautiful, romantic, cute anime. I mean, I really, really, really dig that. So you might want to check that out, and maybe I'll put that kind of in the show title. That way you have an idea of, what we're talking about here. So, or, that way the spelling of it, because it's a weird spelling. It's Franxx, Darling in the Franxx. So, but I'll save the anime question for next week. All right, let's get into our album of the week, so we can wrap this up. So the album of the week is actually, technically it's like 3 and a single, because it's really the entire discography of a guy named Robert Tepper. Now, I mentioned this on the live hangout Q&A for September that we just did this past Sunday. I said that I'd be talking about this. This is a guy who, he had a hit song with the song No Easy Way Out, which is from the Rocky IV soundtrack. And this song, is awesome. And it regularly gets ranked as like one of the great montage songs, and just a genuinely great song. And it is. It's got a lot of feeling, and certainly its moment that's played in Rocky IV is tremendous. Really, that's actually great cinematography, in my opinion, on Stallone's part. He really, to give a lot of history in the time span of a pop song. It's not, it's more of a hard rock song. That's impressive. So, everybody knows that song, No Easy Way Out. And when I was a teenager, I'm like, oh, fuck. Like, that guy had to do more. Like, that song is so fucking good. This guy had to do more. And at the time, the internet wasn't so much the thing. There was no Google, not really. And, and I would go to the kind of, like I was talking earlier about movie stores and so on. I'd go to movie stores, or I'd go to CDs, music stores like FYE or Camelot or something. And I would say, hey, do you have anything by Robert Tepper? Can you order anything from Robert Tepper? And all that would ever come up is, at the time, the compilation called The Rocky Story, which was like a greatest hits of Rocky songs. And this would go all the way up to like Rocky V, which was a tremendous album. I still think that that's the best, even though there's other compilation of Rocky songs that have come out, or the Rocky soundtracks that have come out. I think The Rocky Story is still probably the best one. And anyway, so, there'd always be that. And of course I bought that because I love the Rocky movies, I love the Rocky movies. But I can, they wouldn't know, they look at me, they go cross-eyed or glassy-eyed. They'd be like, oh, Robert Tepper, what the hell are you talking about? Other than this Rocky thing. And so I could never really find anything out. And this guy was even releasing albums later on. Later into the 90s. He actually has 3 albums. But there's Modern Madness, which came out after this first album, which he ended up titling No Way Out, which I thought was a great idea. And the other one is, I think This Is Life is the third one. And then he has like another single out right now. They're listed in the show notes. But for a good 20 years, I wanted to hear what this guy had. And nobody could find these albums. That's crazy. They've got to exist, right? He made them, and I could barely find anything about it. Again, there was no YouTube, none of this stuff. And so eventually later on, once once I start getting used to that the internet is making available, all of this tremendous music from all around the world that maybe never got released in America. I knew about Dragon Force way before Guitar Hero 3 came out, and I was so glad that I did, because fucking A, are they, those guys, my top 10 easy. So anyway, just recently I was like, Robert Tepper, I was listening, doing during some workouts, I was listening to, Rocky soundtracks, which I think can really help out with workouts. And I'm like, oh, I got to look up Robert Tepper. This guy has had to have done so much more. And now finally, you can buy those albums, his 3 albums, and he actually had a single that came out a couple of years ago, I think, or maybe just last year. And I don't know what happened to this guy. I don't know his story because it's still tough to find information on this dude. Okay. But regardless, exactly what I thought back when I was a teenager, I said to myself, you know what? This guy's music's got to be awesome. These albums have got to be fucking great. 20 years later, what do I find out? Yes, they are. They are phenomenal. There's another song, Angel in the City. There's a bunch. I mean, they're on the softer side of hard rock. I know that might sound kind of funny to say. They're on the softer side of hard rock. Definitely like your Stan Bush or any Rick Springfield outside of, outside of Jesse's Girl. Definitely more in that vein, but it's great. I mean, this is really, really great stuff. And just, it's got feeling. Some of there's a couple songs where I can admit, okay, that's a little too cheesy. I mean, I don't think there's such a thing as too cheesy, but there's some where it's like, all right. Like, you're not really getting to anything with this. So I can admit that, but they are overall, these are all great albums. And I love it. And there's a lot of these guys that I'm discovering or rediscovering like this, like Vince DiCola, who, speaking of rock, he did the score for Rocky IV. He also did the music for Transformers, the movie, the animated one from the 80s, which is tremendous. And of course that score and Rocky IV sound very similar, but regardless, he's still been coming out with music. And in fact, he came out with the Saturday Morning RPG, Saturday Morning something was the name of the album. And it's brilliant. It's brilliant music. It's all score, but it's fucking genius and it's beautiful. Same with Paul Herzog, who did the soundtracks for Kickboxer and Bloodsport. Of course, a couple Van Damme vehicles there. He's come out with music, a couple albums as late, which are not soundtracks, even though I suppose they could work as soundtracks, but they're tremendous. And they've all come out in the past, just 4 years. There's a lot of this stuff where these guys, they never really went away and, they keep coming out with stuff just, I don't know. And I mean, I don't know how maybe I can get an interview with these guys at some point. If we ever get around to doing like a second Sovereign Tech a week, I could get in these interviews, and I think it'd be interesting to hear these guys' stories. What do they have to go through to get their music out there and so on? Like Robert Tepper released a new single, I think, in 2017. I mean, what does that look like? Of course, I have talked with Stan Bush about doing a theme song for Sovereign Tech, and well, these things are in talks. I'll just put it that way. But yeah, I'd love to talk to these guys. But yeah, if you want some like hard rock, and the song No Easy Way Out, if you want stuff in that vein, check out the other albums, or check out the entire albums by Robert Tepper. Your music streaming service probably has them, like Pandora has them. So, you could try before you buy if you do want to buy. But yeah, I was really, really impressed. And I knew there had to be more great music by this guy, and there was. Even if it was just one or two other great songs, I would have been happy. And it turns out it's a lot more than that. But there are definitely one or two other great songs from this guy in the vein of No Easy Way Out, and I just love it. So check it out, Robert Tepper. Got a classic there that I kind of pulled out for you, but I think it's totally worthwhile. So, all right, that's it. I'm going to wrap this up, and thank you for all the questions. Keep the questions coming. You've been asking dynamite ones. We're filling the trough back up again, and I'm going to get to all of them, I promise. And I love the questions you've been sending in. And maybe we'll have a good long talk about anime next week, among other things. We'll get your tech questions in. Whatever you want to ask, you ask away. So, all right, that's it for this Wednesday Q&A. I will see all of you on the other side.